Welcome back to another YouTube video, and I'm excited today to discuss a topic that's been catching on a little bit more lately, partially because I think I've been implementing more and talking about it more, and two, it's kind of got coined as a name. The lifter I'm actually going to talk about in the case study today, Wascar Carpio, one of my athletes, has kind of coined this implementation of singles as fatigue singles. And so, without further ado, today I want to get into how to program fatigue singles. So what is a fatigue single? It's basically doing a single after your top rep set instead of doing the single first. And that's not revolutionary. I didn't make this up. This isn't my principle that all of a sudden I originated. Honestly, I've been doing this for a long time, and someone did it before me and someone did it before them, and it's absolutely nothing new. But the reason I wanted to make this video is what I think is new is my reasoning and how I program these over a macro cycle versus just looking at it as a simple tool. And in other words, it's something I used to do occasionally, but now it's become more ingrained as part of the model of programming that I have, as well as an entire system of implementation of those fatigue singles. A big part of fatigue singles, though, is the entirety of my system of programming, which this video is very much a spin-off of what I'm doing over on Powerlifting Now over the next 5 months. So if there's some things I'm going to go through in this video that I'm not going to fully describe that aren't going to make complete sense unless you watch those videos, which this month is the first month of that 5-part series, which is the video of block periodization and updated approach. Next month is going to be creating predictability in a dynamic RPE system. And then the 3 months after that is going to be a whole 3-part series over peaking. And all of these videos build upon each other. And this is kind of a spin-off of having an understanding of, okay, so within this model and system of an updated approach to block periodization and creating predictability in dynamic RPE systems, how am I going to implement singles to allow ourselves to create as little disruption as possible? And the other caveat I'll say is I have a whole video on programming singles that's, I think, almost an hour long. So there's a lot of things that I'm not going to talk about in this video, such as who should do singles, who should not do singles, why you would do singles, a lot of different things that I cover in this video that I'm not going to talk about. I'm really just going to dive into the implementation and the reasoning behind fatigue singles and why this has become a staple within my model of programming. And so wrapping back around to the videos I'm doing on Powerlifting Now, I can kind of give a very, very, very baseline summary of those. Is we are trying to program to create as little disruption block to block as possible and not make big changes, but instead make micro changes. And one of the issues with singles is a lot of times when people implement them and haven't been using them prior, it causes a pretty large disruption to the program as a whole. Versus a system where the model is built around doing singles, such as like the flex training systems model or conjugate, systems that use singles year round and all the time. And the staple of the system is doing those singles consistently and everything building around those. But if it's not built around those singles and we implement those singles, there's a lot of things that can go wrong when we do so. So what do I mean by singles can be fairly disruptive? Because let's be honest, in the grand scheme of things, unless you're Bob or Ashton or Jesus, someone lifting an enormous amount of weight, a single in powerlifting is frankly one of the easiest things you can do, barring you're completely maxing out. But let's say a single at a 7 or 8. It's a very low stress and low fatigue movement. The issue is people, when they do singles, way too often mistake fatigue for actually being more of an adrenaline dump or over prioritization. So that's something I talk about a lot in my full video of encompassing singles, is what people go wrong with singles. And the main one I'm going to kind of talk about here is the fact that when someone does a single first, they typically put way too much priority on it. They put way too much adrenaline, focus, motivation. They get too amped up for it. They tend to get a big dump off afterwards, and the work after suffers because of that. And to the lifter, they say, oh, I'm just really fatigued after the single. But the fact of the matter is when you implement a fatigue single style system where they do the single after the rep set, you'll find that all of a sudden, magically, all of their lifts of the totality of the workout tend to improve. It's the same reasoning for ascending sets. A lot of people will do ascending sets because if they just it's a top rep set and then back off, they'll see a big adrenaline dump on those back off sets. Versus if they do ascending sets, they'll see their quality of work and average intensity increase. It's the same thought process with fatigue singles. So in summary, the reason to do a fatigue single or a single after the top rep set is to create as little disruption as possible, improve the quality of the work in the totality of the workout, and improve the metrics of average intensity and total tonnage across week to week and block to block that you're going to be accumulating by having better overall work. And to that, you might say, is there really that much of a difference? And to me, at first, when I used to do these more sparingly, I would have said probably no. But the more I do these, I've seen a pretty dramatic difference. And that's where we're going to now get into our case studies and eventually get into some application of how to program these over a macro cycle. But we're going to take a look at Wascar in his prep leading the Powerlifting America Nationals, where we were implementing fatigue singles, pulled away from those, started prioritizing the top single, but saw some issues that we ran into. And when I started kind of looking at the data, I saw some pretty profound differences of what happened and why we saw a drop off in strength in that final block leading into the meet. So getting into Wascar's meet prep, we're going to look at the 3 blocks that led into his Powerlifting America Nationals competition. And I'm condensing some of this. One, we're only going to look at the main squat day. I'm also condensing this to kind of to make it very simple to kind of look at. There's a little bit more to it than this, but this still gives the general gist of things. So if we're looking at block 1, we had fatigue singles. We had his top set of 4, followed by a single, followed by 4 back off sets. And one thing to note here that I'll mention a little bit of something we did different later on is his back off set was a percentage drop from that top rep set. So whatever he did on that top rep set, then calculated what to do on his back off set. So that's very important as we get through this. So we can see here, as he went through this first block, we were prioritizing that rep work. He eventually ended the final week with, I believe, a PR set of 4 at 212.5. And even after that, he hit a single at 222.5, which was 9-10 RPE. It was very, very tough. But either way, the quality of the work on this day was fantastic. And 222.5 was, at least at the body weight he was at, a current PR. And one thing to notate here that to kind of precede all this, Wascar eventually hit 217.5 in the meet. Probably could have hit 220. And we're going to get to kind of what happened towards the end of prep that led to this drop-off that we're seeing. So the fatigue single block, we see a very good rep work performance, and we still see a pretty good singles performance. 2 blocks out, we started prioritizing singles. And overall, this block went really, really well. You can see here, we worked our way up. He's hitting some great singles, and he finishes with a PR single at 227.5, or 227.5. Fantastic. We were on cloud 9. Everything was looking like he was going to hit a massive PR come meet time. But one thing to notice here before we get into the next block is notice the rep work. He's now doing a top set of 3, yet he's doing 7.5 kilos less. Top set of 3, 5 kilos less. Top set of 3, 7.5 kilos less. Top set of 3, 7.5 kilos less. And then, again, mistake on my part as a coach, because it's all percentage based off of that rep set, all of his back off sets are lower too. I mean, he's doing weights for a triple on his back offs that are 5 kilos lower than he was doing for a 4x4. There's issues here. We didn't see them on this block because we were still able to carry on and hold the adaptations from this block, but the block after this, we started to see some issues arise from this big drop in average intensity of the rep work. We get into that final peaking block. We're continuing to prioritize singles. We got a good idea that he is cutting weight, so we figure that maybe that this is going to drop off a little bit, but unfortunately it drops off a good deal. You can see here, he eventually hits 220 at what was like a 9 to 10 RPE, and considering he hit 222.5 after a rep set on block 1 and then 227.5, this is a little disappointing. It wasn't bad, but it was definitely a big downturn. And again, we can look at this. Now he's hitting a double at 210. That's 2.5 kilos less than he did for a set of 4. He did a double at 200, 5 kilos less. He did a double at 195, 2.5 kilos less. Did a double at 185, 5 kilos less than this 4. Once we started implementing these singles, his rep work took a big hit. And that could be partially the athlete needs to have a little bit of a better understanding that they need to make sure to continue to push and prioritize that rep work. But that's probably more on me as a coach. Things I learned eventually, and then I'm going to talk about, well, I'll talk about it now, is eventually I did percentage-based back-off work, so that was set and not calculating off of the top rep set, so that we could keep that more standardized, so that the average intensity didn't drop too much, even if we saw some of the rep work kind of fluctuating based off of singles. But the biggest thing we're going to get to is we just decided to implement fatigue singles for a longer period of time. Because while this this simple little thing of doing one set before the other doesn't seem like a big deal, let's look at what happened here. And my math might not be perfect here. I'm not a statistician, but I think this will give a good idea, and I think overall it'll be able to kind of replicate what I'm trying to talk about here. So if we're looking at this first block, and arguably this first block was maybe the most productive. Block 1 and block 2 both went really well. But if I'm looking at the totality of the workload done, this first block was really, really good. If we're looking at that top rep set, we had an average. I'm using the fact that if you look here at the calculations, I'm using 227.5 as his max. I'm using that to kind of calculate average intensity since he hit this as his 1 RM and that was his best rep of the entire prep. 227.5 is his top end. So I'm using that. So his average intensity of his top rep set was 88.46%. So he was, if I'm taking all 4 top rep sets. If I'm taking the single, he was at 92.86%. And if we're taking the back off sets, the 4x4s, he was on average 78.85%. For a total average, which this isn't perfect because obviously it's disproportionate that he only did 1 rep here and he did 4 reps here and he did a 4x4 here. This isn't perfect. I'm literally just calculating the fact that these are all equal. It still kind of gets to the point. But here, 86.72% is the average intensity if we're just looking at like these 3 kind of calculations, as well as the total tonnage here. When we get into the next block, we'll see here the top single average intensity goes up. Well, it should have. We were pushing it a bit harder. It was now first. It goes from 92.86% to 95.05%. So you can see here a 2.2% increase, which is good, but not drastic. I mean, we only hit 5 kilos more in the grand scheme of things. That's a difference by putting it first, but it's not a massive difference in comparison to the fact that we took a big hit on the rep work. We now were only doing, our average intensity on the top set of 3 was 85.4%, which is, yeah, it's only a 3% drop from this, but we have to factor in he was doing 1 rep less. So once we factor that in, if I do a 3% addition, because in general, if you've watched my videos before, 1 rep is about 3%. That was a 6% drop in average intensity of his rep set, even though the reps were dropping and he should be going heavier. He did 7.5 kilos less with a rep less. That's disproportionate. And then the fact is that also then calculated all of his back off work, which I didn't do all the calculations here, but you can obviously see it basically equates 4x4 and then 1x3 to 3x5, pretty similar. They shouldn't be drastically different, but you can see here, average back off set 78.85%. Even the triple here, if we're just doing the average intensity of that triple, 76.92%. Average intensity dropped and then volume dropped, which shouldn't have happened because we were, in grand scheme of things, doing pretty similar volume. If you equate 1x4, 4x4 to a 2x3 and 3x5, it equates, I actually think this is 1 total rep more. Yeah, that should be 1 total rep more in cents. And that doesn't mean always volume's gonna be higher, but they should be basically equated volume-wise. But we ended up doing 2.46% less total tonnage, not because we changed the actual repetition schemes too much. It was because of the intensity drop causing a 2% drop. So not only did we have a 6% drop in average intensity on the rep work, we also had a 2.4% drop in the total tonnage on the volume. Then we get to that final block where then we start to see that downturn. Now, the average intensity, even though we're trying to push the heaviest lifts of prep and we're prioritizing, is actually lower than what we did on that first block when that single was masked or fatigued behind that top set of 4. So even though we're doing a double instead of a top set of 4, we still had an average intensity drop. Like, we're actually doing less weight than he was when he was doing sets of 4. So not only was it about 1.5% drop just from straight weight, add in the fact that the rep changes, it's now about a 4.65% intensity drop, as well as then that's affecting the back off work. Again, now we're doing 4s again, so it's a 4x4. Earlier in the block it was a 1x2 and a 3x4, but we adjusted that. But either way, pretty similar. If you're looking at this, he's doing a 4x4 at 177.5 versus a 4x4 at 190 because of the difference of how it was calculating. So 12.5 kilo difference in the back off sets because of how this all played out. And then so to add on top of that, a really big drop in total tonnage. Now, I was expecting that because we were dropping reps here to an extent, but the fact of the matter is especially once we got to weeks 3 and 4, as I started adding some volume back in, it was only a 2-rep drop. Instead of doing a double or a set of 4, he was just doing a double. So it was only a 2-rep drop change, but we eventually, in the totality of the average weekly tonnage of those 4 weeks, 19.27% drop in volume between the slight changes in the rep schemes with the doubles, but even more so in the changes just the average intensity. So this is where it became incredibly apparent to me. And I saw this not only with Wascar, which this is a bit more extreme example, but I saw this with many athletes across the board. So I started kind of deciding I'm going to start implementing this system, which I was already doing to an extent for the most part, that is going to prioritize this single staying behind the top rep set for as long as possible. So how does that play out? So I'm going to give you some options here of program design. So within this program design, this is going to make a lot more sense if you were to watch the Powerlifting Now videos. So I'm going to run through this pretty quick because I'm not going to describe all the things that I talk about there. But here we have a 3-block setup that would be pretty similar to what I'm using Wascar as the template of what we might do. So first block, we're doing a top set of 5 followed by back off 5s in a single. Block 2, set of 4 followed by back off 4s. Block 3, top set of 3 followed by 4 by 5. And there's ways we can do this fatigue drop. So with the assumption that we're doing ascending RPEs on that top set, it's going to stay relatively static block to block. Again, Powerlifting Now, I explain that a lot more. But what we can do to be able to maintain this average intensity and this tonnage that got so affected by us prioritizing that single and how it affected the rep work is one, like I said, obviously what I need to do, I mentioned here, you can either do a percent drop from the top set or percentage based. With Wascar, we're doing percentage based for moving forward here. But even so, here, we have a 3-block progression of a very slow adjustment and change of prioritizing those singles slowly. So no matter what, we are continuing to implement the fatigue single system where it's afterwards. So this first block, we're very much prioritizing the rep set. That's first, it's higher RPE, we're prioritizing it. You can see here the singles are very much what we'll call skill practice. 6 RPE to 7 RPE, they are there. We're looking to improve them throughout the block, but they are very much low priority in comparison to the top set of 5. But they are an ascending intensity. You are going to do more on this single than you are doing on that set of 5. So it's an increased intensity on the absolute end as we kind of build up from that set of 5. And what that does for a lifter is because it's more weight, it tends to be motivating. Anytime a lifter gets to go up in weight, there tends to be a novelty to that versus dropping down in weight, which is one of the issues of doing the single and then dropping down to a set of 5. So here, we can see here that first block, high priority on rep work, singles take a big back seat. Block 2, we continue to prioritize that rep work, a top set of 4. You can see the same exact RPE progression, but we're going to start to build on that single a bit more and build up to a little bit of a heavier weight to an 8 RPE. Very much what you kind of saw with Wascar's first block that we did here, even though this got pushed a little bit more, which is completely fine. Then after that, we'll call it like a peaking block per se. What we can do is we can, especially in like Wascar's case where we saw a pretty profound difference, we're going to continue to prioritize that top set of 3. But since the RPE on the single is going to start to build up a bit more, instead of doing a 5 to a 6 and building up to like to 8 to 9 by block 4, we're going to do a 5, 6, 7, 8 ascending model of RPE there on the rep work while we do a 6, 7, 8, 9 on the single. So the average intensity should work itself out because of that. But here, this is where we're going to see ourselves be able to continue to work in the fatigued single system, prioritize the rep work so we don't create too much disruption, but at the right time be able to prioritize that single to see what that top end strength is come meet time. So in this peaking block, they're still doing that top triple first, lower RPE, so we should have a little bit more energy for that single. We're going to start to build on that single, and then the final week before maybe we taper, or maybe this is just the final week of a regular block or a macro cycle, and we want to kind of test and push more towards like hitting a new PR. We put that single first, then shift that triple to second, followed by the back off work. Another option, because again, this depends on the lifter. How disproportionate are they when they do fatigued singles versus doing the single first? Are they as extreme as Wascar, or is it more of a slight difference? So another option for option 2 is you can have that same first block. On the second block, you will have that single be first to have a little bit more of a test to let that be a bit more pronounced, followed by that top set of 4. And then on that third block, again, you have follow the same model as option 1. You build up with the rep work, and then week 4, you have that single be the first option before doing that top triple. Again, mainly on both of these blocks, just to have the skill practice of being able to do those first, unfatigued, to be able to kind of express full strength. And the last option, which is what I think a lot of people can do, it just depends on what is best for you, is, again, first block is the same, prioritize the rep work. Second block, you can either, 1, prioritize the rep work, or the final week, you can have the single first. And then the final block leading into the meet, that's when you finally prioritize the single. And honestly, with Wascar, we could have done that. You can see here, this block here went great. And then the second block continued to go really well because we were able to carry over these adaptations. He hadn't detrained off of this rep work yet, so he was able to express this top end strength. For Wascar, we very well could use this option 3, where we make sure to prioritize the single or the rep work, blocks 1 and 2, suppress the single as a fatigue single afterwards, And then finally, the final block, whether again, it's either meet prep and this is the block leading the meet, or this is just something we're using at the end of a macro cycle to kind of test or push singles. We prioritize that single for the final block before then shifting back into the beginning of the macro cycle again and working to prioritizing that rep work. So that summarizes the implementation within my system and the model of how I'm using fatigue singles when we're looking at a macro cycle view, whether that's just a regular training block or a peaking block into a meet. Again, this makes a lot more sense within the totality of the system that I'm talking about on Powerlifting Now with all 5 videos I'm doing. So I definitely make sure to check that out. But hopefully, even within that, you can still get a good idea of how you can use this within your own coaching or within your own self-coaching or lifters and anything that can help you as a power lifter to improve your training, and how you can be able to use singles and not disrupt your training too much from what its normal flow is and what works best for you. And as always, if you have any questions, make sure to comment down below. Make sure to like the video, share it to those who you think who may benefit from it. Make sure you're subscribed if you're not already. And until next time, peace.